have we taken the time to actually hear the voices behind the statistics?
The greatest threat or the greatest risk to our future security is actually not having a coherent, truthful, factually applied approach to dealing with climate change.
Nature is being sacrificed for unsustainable development, particularly, and for the expansion of some industries.
Some of these decisions that we make on infrastructure, in particular things like water infrastructure and dams, they last for hundreds of years. And so we have to make a decision, maybe now, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, that is relevant for the next 100 years.
We need to hold power to account and say we've got a real climate and ecological emergency on our hands, and we cannot continue with business as usual.
People that are struggling to feed themselves, I don't really think that they're really bothered about not using plastic or things like that, no.
Depending on what we do within the next 8 years or so, future predictions could be quite different, but unfortunately we already have got an element of climate change locked in, and life is already getting a lot harder and will continue to get a lot harder for millions of people around the world.
There needs to be a partnership amongst all of humanity, and not just an agenda that is promoted by a particular group.
As a systems thinker, we have a role, no matter how micro and small, in helping that kind of macro policy governance space do the right thing. One thing I would like to see more of is scenario generation, so plausible future scenarios that say in 10, 20, 30, 50 years' time, climate change or pandemics or the threat from hostile states will plausibly affect the way you live your life in these ways. Now, not to scare, not to terrify, but to help make these things tangible.
So when we also speak of the environment, we think of like renewable products that women can use when it comes to when they're menstruating.
If they can make a biodegradable iPhone, that will be the best thing for computer industry.
I work in a lab, for example. We use quite a lot of single-use plastics. We need to do more in those certain industries, because this is kind of like a repetitive problem that we have, to improve our usage of, single-use plastic, or develop, new technologies that we can use to, improve health in general and understanding in science, but also consider the environment as something quite important to take care of.
It's not technology will guide the nature. Technology should support the nature, and nature should guide the technology.
There's an exciting opportunity here for things like virtual reality, again, to make those plausible future scenarios more real, immerse people in what the future could really look like.
What will be important is that communities and stakeholders have a way to communicate what they need to government. So essentially having a very responsive government, I think, will be important. All of these climate hazards will impact, again, people in different ways, and we want to make sure that the decisions that we're making at a government level, at a physical infrastructure level, will be relevant and useful to sort of the users in the end. Some of these decisions that we make on infrastructure, in particular things like water infrastructure and dams, they last for hundreds of years, and so we have to make a decision, maybe now, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, that is relevant for the next 100 years.
There's going to be more people putting stress on the more habitable parts of the planet. It's a really, really bleak and scary picture, and I try not to think about it too much in my day-to-day. Things like mass migration, food shortages, they lead to war, they lead to unrest.
As we move more into the metaverse and, more into things like remote working and, you see less need for travel and the pollution it provides or creates, rather. When we look at the relationship between all these things, like I've said, there's no energy, there's no productivity. It only just increases the wealth gap, and that just creates more and more frustration and anger within the masses. So you might begin to see more uprisings. Again, that might be things you see them already in a lot of developing countries.
But unfortunately, we already have got an element of climate change locked in, and life is already getting a lot harder and will continue to get a lot harder for millions of people around the world.
I definitely see renewable energy being something that is not spoken about, but that has actually come to fruition.
If you're encouraging people to use solar energy, solar panels, it's also important that the process in making those solar panels become also sustainable. It's an end-to-end planning. You don't just pick the middle alone.
But where we will be in 2050 really depends on what we do in the next few years.
If we are able to discover something called renewable water, if we are able to discover something called renewable energy, people will become world citizens.
For me, water is one of sort of the foundational building blocks of societies that people really can't live without. I think that we are beginning to get a grasp on the idea that there might be more heat in some places and climate events will be more variable or more intense. But I think that there are knock-on effects of that we haven't fully grasped as yet. The first of them being things like migration, forced migration, people in areas that are being flooded routinely, or islands that are seeing significant sea level rise and entire coastlines that have to move.
In my opinion, if we're looking to 2050 to a best case scenario for the UK, there are a lot of things that the government will have had to address in order to get us to this good scenario. Like we had with the COVID emergency, drastic action was taken, our lives changed overnight to deal with this emergency, to stop people dying.
By 2050, what I hope that the government does is they have a way, a consistent way, maybe a team of researchers, a team of professionals that, one, look into what is the climate going to be like in the future and make sure that that's integrated into the decision making, and two, have a team that's also focused on collecting information from stakeholders and communities and listening to sort of the people that they represent.
But there's a real opportunity here to actually say, take a town or village or a town or a city, break that into smaller component parts and say, right, this is your current kind of like output, this is the energy you use in a general kind of, average level. If you could get to this level, you'll be doing a great thing for your immediate area. Enable those people to make small, incremental, realistic changes that they own, that they feel some attachment to, rather than big hand-sweeping gestures across the nation that say, yes, we're going to do this for climate change. No, break it down, make it smaller, empower people to find their own way to make improvements.
Part of what I think about when I think about engineering systems for the future is not to tell people, don't do these things, so don't do the things you want to do, or to limit yourself or limit your growth. I think of my job as an engineer as to help people see where maybe they don't need as much, but also really to provide what they need.
What we need to do is mitigate as much as possible, restore nature, and also have a transformative and radical vision for how we can adapt to a very different world.
We have a purpose why we are here, and we are the only species which can make change. Nobody else.